Hey guys, before we start the video, I've got a quick update for you. Unfortunately, we're currently facing some issues with this channel. But don't worry, I've got a backup channel ready for you. From now on, all my new content will be uploaded there. The link is in the pinned comment and description. Please go there, subscribe, like the latest video, and comment, I'm here. It may seem like a small thing, but your support means a lot and will help me keep making better content for you. Linda Reed, a young woman employed at a prestigious jewelry store, mysteriously vanished during her lunch break, leaving behind a trail of perplexing clues and bewildered witnesses. Decades passed before the truth behind her disappearance was finally unveiled, much to the astonishment of the investigators. Born in the opulent Australian city of Gold Coast in 1962, Linda was raised in a warm and affectionate family, exuding a vibrant and lively persona that attracted many friends. During her school days, she crossed paths with a young man named Robert, with whom she eventually tied the knot at the tender age of 19. Together, they harbored dreams of establishing a large, harmonious family and constructing their dream abode. Without further delay, the newlyweds embark on this journey, purchasing a plot of land and diligently setting aside a substantial portion of their earnings for the construction project. Opting to forego renting a place, they resided in a trailer nestled in Robert's parents' backyard, all in the pursuit of expediting the completion of their dream home. Linda secured a position as a salesperson at a renowned jewelry store situated within a bustling shopping complex, instantly taking a liking to her job and forging strong bonds with her colleagues. The generous income she earned facilitated her savings for their envisioned home. The month of December in 1983 was particularly hectic, with the store abuzz with holiday fervor. Linda, then 21 years old, toiled tirelessly throughout her shift, only managing to break for lunch at noon. It was on December 13th that the unexpected occurred. Linda failed to return from her break at the usual time. This was not normal from her. She always punctual. Her absence throughout the remainder of the workday left her coworkers in a state of bewilderment and concern. The workday continued, and Linda was still nowhere to be seen. It seemed like she had left her shift abruptly, but her colleagues were hesitant to believe that she would do such a thing, given her strong sense of responsibility. Her absence also puzzled her husband, who waited for her at home before reaching out to her coworkers. They informed him that Linda had not returned from her break, causing Robert to grow increasingly worried. He searched for her in the shopping center and other places she frequented, but she was nowhere to be found. As time passed, his concern deepened, prompting him to contact the police by 7 p.m. However, he was informed that a missing person report could only be filed after 24 hours. Linda's mother faced the same response when she tried to reach out. The family had no choice but to wait until the next day for the report to be accepted. The police investigation revealed that Linda had gone shopping for New Year's gifts and visited her bank during her break. The security guard at the shopping center was the last person to see her leaving in her car. Despite efforts to locate her, there were no further leads. Linda's loved ones were left wondering why she had left work unexpectedly and where she could have gone. Police issued alerts for her and her vehicle while also keeping an eye on Robert, although he had a solid alibi, contrary to the usual statistics regarding spousal crimes. No other potential suspects were identified, and based on the information provided by those who knew Linda, she was not known to have any enemies and was generally regarded as a positive individual. As the investigation continued in search of new leads, several days had elapsed since Linda's disappearance. On the third day, law enforcement received a tip about an abandoned vehicle matching the description of Linda's car. The car was discovered in a suburban area 20 kilometers away from the shopping center. Upon arrival at the scene, it was confirmed that the vehicle belonged to Linda. The car was parked by the roadside near some bushes. During the 1980s, this particular area was largely undeveloped, covered with bushes and trees. Inside the car, authorities found Christmas presents that Linda had purchased before she went missing. The doors were unlocked and the car key was left in the ignition. Notably, an empty menthol cigarette pack was found in the front passenger seat area, which was unusual as neither Linda nor Robert smoked. Investigators speculated that the pack could belong to the perpetrator. Subsequently, a thorough search for evidence was conducted, leading to a grim discovery. Approximately 40 meters away from the vehicle, in the streambed of a small creek, Linda's lifeless body was found. Her hands were bound with a bikini and eyeglass cord, items that her family confirmed did not belong to her. Forensic analysis revealed that Linda had died from asphyxiation and had also been subjected to violence. Unfortunately, DNA evidence from the perpetrator could not be obtained at that time. Based on the evidence gathered, investigators constructed a tentative timeline of events. It was believed that an unknown assailant attacked Linda in the shopping center parking lot while she was loading her gifts into the car. The perpetrator then forced her to drive to the location where her body was discovered, where he proceeded to commit further acts of violence before ultimately taking her life. Despite extensive efforts, no concrete leads pointing to a suspect were uncovered. Subsequently, they made the decision to conduct interviews with all the patrons of the shopping center present during Linda's lunch break. Undoubtedly, this proved to be an arduous undertaking. In an effort to capture the attention of the public, law enforcement officials placed the victim's car within the shopping center, complete with a photo of the young woman and details regarding her disappearance. The hope was that this visual display would jog the memories of those who had encountered Linda that fateful day. A number of witnesses informed the authorities that they had spotted a teenager with blonde hair in the shopping center's parking lot. Yet the investigators were unable to identify this individual. Other witnesses provided more intriguing information. On the day Linda went missing, they observed a man attempting to hitch a ride on the highway, less than a kilometer away from where the victim's body was eventually discovered. Shortly thereafter, the driver of a van approached the police and disclosed that he had picked up a hitchhiker on that very same day at the exact location where other witnesses had seen the man. The plot thickened when the driver recounted that the hitchhiker was smoking menthol cigarettes, but he held them all in his hand without a pack. Given that an empty pack of menthol cigarettes was recovered from the victim's car, this clue became a pivotal breakthrough for the investigators. Forensic experts meticulously examined the driver's van and uncovered a fingerprint on the glass near the passenger seat that did not match the owner's prints. Regrettably, cross-referencing this fingerprint with existing databases failed to produce any leads. Furthermore, the description of the suspect provided by the driver was vague and did not aid the authorities in locating the man. No additional evidence was unearthed, causing the investigation to reach a standstill for several months. It wasn't until over a year later, in 1985, that a new lead emerged. A prisoner in one of the state's correctional facilities, who was acting as a police informant, shared a valuable tip with the investigators. His cellmate, Craig Andrew McConnell, had allegedly confessed to him about the murder of Linda Reed. Based on Craig's account, he and another individual attempted to steal a car from the shopping center's parking lot when Linda caught sight of them. Concerned that she would recognize them and alert the authorities, the perpetrators kidnapped and murdered her. Law enforcement had encountered Craig's name previously. He had been sentenced to 2 life terms for murders committed in 1984, was a person of interest in Linda's case, although no direct link could be established at the time. Following a tip from the informant, investigators interviewed Craig in prison, where he denied any involvement in the crime. He claimed that his cellmate fabricated the story and they never discussed the incident. Despite his assertions, authorities remained skeptical. Craig went on to commit 2 more heinous murders shortly after Linda's demise, lending credibility to the informant's narrative. While forensic analysis failed to match the suspect's fingerprints with those recovered from the vehicle's glass, detectives persisted in considering Craig a viable suspect. In 1986, they opted to pursue charges against him, primarily relying on the informant's testimony. Tragically, Craig passed away just before the trial, succumbing to a drug overdose. Nonetheless, the prosecution possessed the informant's detailed account, including a rough sketch of the area where Linda's body was abandoned, which experts confirmed to be a close match to the actual location. Furthermore, Craig allegedly mentioned that Linda warned her captors about potential retaliation from someone named Rob, a nickname she frequently used for her spouse. The suspect also claimed to have consumed a cheese and vegetable sandwich belonging to Linda. claims supported by the discovery of cheese residue in her purse after her vehicle was recovered. Despite the specificity of these details, they constituted circumstantial evidence and fell short of establishing guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Due to this reason, Craig was acquitted of Linda's murder. Investigators still maintain their belief in his involvement in the crime and have been attempting to gather additional evidence to secure a guilty verdict. However, their efforts have reached a dead end, causing the case to remain unresolved for many years. In 2014, detectives decided to reopen the investigation and reevaluate the existing evidence. They provided fingerprints from the van's glass to experts who utilized modern technology to reconstruct them. Upon successfully loading the data into the database, the police finally obtained a match. The fingerprints belonged to Troy James O'Mara, who was already serving a life sentence. A year and a half after Linda's death, he murdered a 22-year-old woman, and the details of the crime bore striking similarities. Despite this, James was never a suspect in Linda's case and was not on the police's radar. The detectives recalled that during the initial stages of the investigation, several witnesses reported seeing a fair-haired teenager in the shopping center's parking lot. Given that James was only 17 years old at the time, he matched the description. Despite this, the police sought to gather as much evidence as possible, leading to an unexpected turn of events. It was discovered that a DNA sample of the person who assaulted Linda had been stored at the warehouse all this time. Although it was no longer listed as evidence in the documents, the investigators stumbled upon it almost by chance. However, there was a problem. The sample was very small and had already begun to degrade, preventing local experts from extracting the perpetrator's profile from it. Subsequently, the investigators dispatched it to a state-of-the-art laboratory situated in New Zealand. The specialists successfully isolated the profile, which turned out to be an exact match to James's DNA. This meticulous process spanned several years for the investigators. Given that the perpetrator was already serving a life sentence, were able to take their time and meticulously prepare the case for trial. Ultimately, James was apprehended on August 26, 2018, nearly 35 years after the heinous crime. At that juncture, the man was 51 years old. Having spent more than half his life behind bars, he had accumulated several additional charges during his incarceration. James had assaulted guards twice and even managed to escape from prison once, only to be recaptured the following day. Following his arrest for Linda's murder, he vehemently denied his culpability, prompting the commencement of trial preparations. The legal proceedings extended over several years, but in March 2021, the criminal opted to confess. He recounted seeing Linda in the parking lot where the young woman was seated in her car enjoying a sandwich. He entered her vehicle and coerced her to drive to a secluded area where he committed the heinous act. When questioned about his motives by the judge, James callously admitted that he simply desired to kill a random young woman that fateful day. Consequently, James was handed a 30-year prison sentence for Linda's murder, with the possibility of applying for early release soon, due to his lengthy incarceration. Presently, he remains incarcerated, although the prospect of release in the coming years looms. Regrettably, Linda's father did not live to witness the apprehension of her killer. He had spent decades yearning to uncover the truth behind his daughter's fate, but succumbed to cancer after a protracted battle. Following his wife's demise, Robert vowed never to remarry, as his heart belonged to Linda eternally. During the trial, upon the pronouncement of the verdict, he expressed gratitude to the investigators and lamented that James had irrevocably robbed him of his family. As for Craig and the informant's narrative, the details remain shrouded in ambiguity. It is important to highlight that the individual providing information was a seasoned criminal and may have had ulterior motives for assisting in the resolution of the case. There is a possibility that the information provided to the authorities was not entirely truthful and that crucial details about the case may have been obtained from media sources. Janice Pietropoula and Lynn Seathaler, two young best friends aged 19, were scheduled to return to their hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on June 30, 1973. However, when they failed to emerge from their rented cottage at Farrar's Motel by noon that Saturday, the hotel staff assumed they were simply sleeping in. The manager of the day shift decided to investigate and knocked on their door. Despite repeated attempts, there was no response. He made the decision to enter the room using a spare key. What he found inside left him in a state of shock. A gruesome crime scene where both girls had been brutally murdered. The community of Virginia Beach was left in turmoil by this tragic event. Little did the investigators know at the time that it would take 50 years for this case to be solved. Was this a random act of violence? Or were Janice and Lynn targeted by a serial killer? Virginia Beach, located in the state of Virginia, stands as an independent city. The current year of 2024 has seen the population soar to an impressive 463,000 residents. Despite this large number, crime rates in Virginia Beach have taken a significant dip. Shockingly, only one individual out of every 894 people falls victim to crime, making Virginia Beach a remarkable 29% safer than other regions in the United States. This city allures tourists throughout the year with its lively beach town ambience and thriving entertainment options. Those seeking an escape from the monotony of everyday life can find solace in this idyllic paradise, embracing the relaxed lifestyle often associated with coastal towns. Plethora of family-friendly attractions await, from kayaking and fishing to hiking adventures. For those who prefer lounging on the beach, Virginia Beach also captivates food enthusiasts with its diverse array of restaurants serving delectable cuisines. However, in the year 1973, Virginia Beach was shaken by a perplexing double homicide that left local authorities baffled: the tragic murders of Janice Pietropoulos and Lynn Seathaler. Janice Pietropoulos, born to Michael and Lucille Pietropoulos on March 11, 1954, grew up with her three siblings in Verona, Pittsburgh. Known for her gentle nature and ambitious spirit, Janice cherished her Volkswagen Beetle, a prized possession she acquired through part-time work during high school. After graduating from Penn Hills High School in 1972, she worked as an editorial assistant for a financial magazine, saving up for her college education. During her high school years, she formed a close bond with Lynn Seathaler, who coincidentally shared her birth date of March 11, 1954. Raised by Paul and Phyllis Seathaler in Penn Hills, Pittsburgh, Lynn was described as friendly, outgoing, and possessing a gentle demeanor. The two individuals graduated from Penn Hills High School in 1972 and commenced their careers as secretaries for the Urban Redevelopment Authority. Lynn, like her companion Janice, opted to work first before saving up for college. Despite this, both of them desired to savor their newfound adult lives by embarking on an adventure prior to fully immersing themselves in work and studies. In the summer of 1973, Janice, Lynn, and a few of their high school acquaintances decided to journey to Virginia Beach for a well-deserved break. Ultimately, Janice and Lynn embarked on the trip alone as their friends withdrew due to other obligations. On June 24, 1973, they packed their belongings and flew from Pittsburgh to Virginia Beach. Over the next 5 days, both Janice and Lynn relished their time relaxing on the beach and exploring the attractions of Virginia Beach's oceanfront. During the evenings, they frequented local bars and restaurants with the friends they had made during the day. On multiple occasions, the motel staff observed the girls returning with male companions. Their comings and goings were not questioned as they were two young women on vacation enjoying themselves. However, the conclusion of their holiday was swiftly approaching. On June 30, 1973, both Janice and Lynn were scheduled to leave Virginia Beach and head back to Pittsburgh. When the day manager went to remind them of the checkout time, he had no idea he would be met with a gruesome scene. In the living room, he found the door jammed. Upon finally pushing it open, he was horrified to discover Janice's partially clothed body obstructing the doorway. It was evident that she had been murdered, given the significant amount of blood around her head and upper body. He called out for Lynn, who was in the adjacent room. Upon entering the second bedroom, he found Lynn had also been killed and left on the floor. Without delay, he rushed out to alert the authorities. The girls' highly anticipated holiday had concluded in tragedy. Upon the arrival of law enforcement, mere minutes after the distress call, they were met with a scene that could only be described as utterly chilling. The lifeless bodies of both girls lay on the floor, resembling discarded rag dolls. The room itself bore witness to a violent struggle, with Janice and Lynn's belongings scattered haphazardly. Their bodies, battered and bloodied, had met their tragic end with gunshot wounds to their heads. The bodies were swiftly taken for autopsy to ascertain the exact cause of death. As investigators delved deeper, a window screen discovered outside the cottage hinted at the killer's point of entry. The question lingered. Had the killer been lying in wait within the room, or had they slipped in while the girls slept? The motive behind the attack remained shrouded in mystery. Was it a random act of violence, or a meticulously planned crime? Dusting for fingerprints and collecting potential forensic evidence, investigators noted that the crime scene bore the hallmarks of a staged robbery. Oddly, nothing of value had been taken from the room, leading them to rule out robbery as a motive. The discovery of 3 fake identity cards hinted at a possible link to alcohol purchases. The third card, belonging to an unidentified girl, added another layer of intrigue. Bullets found at the scene were too damaged to determine the gun's caliber, but it was speculated to be a smaller caliber, possibly a pistol. The autopsy unveiled even more gruesome details. The girls had been murdered hours before their discovery in the early hours of Saturday morning. Janice had endured a harrowing ordeal of strangulation, assault, and multiple gunshot wounds to the face. Lynn was not assaulted, but she endured being strangled, beaten, and a 4-inch slash across her neck before being shot twice in the face. A shattered wine glass was found in the room, stained with Lynn's blood. Forensic evidence was meticulously collected from the girls' fingernails and skin, securely stored for further analysis. Case left investigators puzzled with more questions than answers. Who would target 2 young girls on vacation, and what could be the motive? Under the leadership of William Hayden, a distinguished captain at the Virginia Beach Police Department, the investigation commenced. Motel staff were interviewed about the events leading up to the tragedy. The night manager recalled seeing the girls returning between 11:30 p.m. and 1 a.m. appearing cheerful and unaccompanied. Further inquiries revealed that the girls had befriended several men during their stay and invited them to their rooms. Half of the police force in Virginia Beach was assigned the task of hunting down the person or persons responsible for the girls' death. They combed through rooftops, manholes, beach hangouts, and local bars in search of any suspicious individuals. A helicopter team was even called in to provide aerial surveillance. But unfortunately, their efforts did not bring them any closer to solving the case. Meanwhile, another team focused on interviewing multiple men who were acquainted with the girls during their stay at the motel. Each man provided solid alibis and willingly submitted to DNA testing. Despite a week of relentless detective work, the leads they followed ended in dead ends, and the hundreds of interviews conducted yielded no new information. Captain Richard C. Davis, head of the detective division in Virginia Beach, stated that several suspects had been ruled out, leaving them with no viable leads to pursue. As the investigation continued, the families of Janice and Lynn laid the girls to rest in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on July 5, 1973. With a lack of progress, the case hit a standstill as the years went by. Advancements in DNA technology were still in progress, and investigators tested any forensic evidence they had collected. Unfortunately, the results were inconclusive. However, they did discover that the murder weapon used was a .22 caliber pistol. A glimmer of hope emerged a decade later when Captain Hayden followed up on a lead that took him to Los Angeles in 1983 to investigate 2 potential suspects. Ultimately, it was revealed that these men were not involved in the murders. Investigators also explored the theory of a possible serial killer in the Virginia Beach area targeting Janice and Lynn. The sole connection that the investigators had to the ongoing case were the victims, who were of similar age to both Janice and Lynn. There were a total of 11 young, attractive, and Caucasian girls who had been tragically murdered. Despite the lack of distinguishing factors in the cases, this remained the most promising lead. The investigators were hopeful that by identifying the suspected serial killer, they would finally uncover the truth behind Janice and Lynn's murder. However, by 1988, the investigation had hit a standstill. The dossier at the Virginia Beach Police Department contained a staggering 1,300 pages of notes and investigation files, yet the case had gone cold over the years. despite diligent efforts to follow up on leads and retest forensic evidence. The investigation yielded no results and the file was once again put away. It wasn't until 2018 that the cold case finally saw a breakthrough. With advancements in DNA research, the investigators decided to utilize the new technology. After testing the forensic evidence recovered from Janice and Lynn's autopsies and uploading the DNA profile into the national database, they received a positive match. The Virginia Police Department sought assistance from various law enforcement agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Naval Crime Investigation Service, and New York Police Department. Through their collaborative efforts, they were able to trace the DNA to a man who had lived in New York but had ties to Norfolk, Virginia in the 1970s. This man, Ernest Broadnax, was a military veteran. On April 8, 2019, authorities took into custody 81-year-old Ernest Broadnax. Nearly 5 decades had passed since the tragic murders of 2 teenagers, and now law enforcement claims to have finally apprehended the individual responsible. Ernest Broadnax, now 80 years old, was arrested by the New York City Police in connection to the cold case homicides. Allegedly, he is the one who took the lives of the 2 young girls who were residing in a beach house in Virginia Beach. Back in 1973, Ernest had been residing in an affordable housing community for veterans in Queens, New York. When the police arrived to detain him, Ernest reportedly nodded in acknowledgement and cooperated as they escorted him to the awaiting police vehicle. His neighbors described him as a friendly and helpful individual who preferred solitude. They were taken aback upon learning about his dark past. Not much information has been disclosed about Ernest's early years. Records indicate that he was born in 1938 and lived in Norfolk, Virginia. He had been married and divorced and had served in the military. Following an assault charge in the late 1960s, he was incarcerated. It remains unclear whether he left the military prior to his arrest or received a dishonorable discharge. In the 1970s, he was released and remarried. The relationship ended due to his abusive behavior. Investigators suspect that shortly after his second divorce, Ernest committed the murders of Janice and Lynn. The motive behind the escalation of his criminal activities remains unknown. His whereabouts following the crimes were uncertain, but his extensive criminal record paints a different picture. With 14 prior arrests dating back to the 1990s, he was imprisoned in 2001 on 3 separate occasions for burglary and assault offenses. In 2013, he was released and has since maintained a low profile residing at the Veterans Housing in Queens, New York. According to a neighbor, Ernest once alluded to being involved in a serious crime that harmed someone, but he did not provide details. He also confessed to fellow residents in the apartment building that he had struggled with drug and alcohol addiction in the past but had successfully recovered after undergoing rehabilitation. Following the apprehension of Ernest Broadnax, Virginia Beach Police Chief Jim Cervera briefed the media on the arrest process. Janice's brother, Michael Jr. Pietropola, shared the family's ordeal and expressed gratitude for the apprehension of a suspect. Lynn's friend, Valerie DeVere, informed reporters that initially the police suspected her of knowing the suspect. She was relieved to discover that she was not acquainted with him and was grateful to witness justice being served for her friend's murder. Janice's younger sister, Judy, recalled the day she learned of her sister's tragic death. Judy and her elder sister, Michelle, conveyed how Janice's murder had shattered their family and altered their lives forever. "Part of us all perished," remarked Michelle. For Police Captain William Hayden, who led the initial investigation, the case held personal significance for reasons he could not articulate. Ernest Broadnax remained in custody at a detention facility in Queens, New York, following his arrest. During his detention, investigators uncovered additional incriminating evidence from his residence. The specifics of the findings were not disclosed to the media or the public, as the case had not yet gone to trial. Investigators also needed to corroborate their DNA evidence and obtained a sample from Ernest. They also verified the viability of Janice's DNA sample for forensic analysis by collecting samples from her 3 siblings, which unequivocally matched hers, confirming that the original DNA sample remained intact and admissible as evidence in court. In August 2019, while awaiting a trial date, Ernest Broadnax was ordered by a judge to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. The evaluation revealed that he was suffering from dementia, making him unfit to stand trial due to his impaired memory, thinking, and social skills. Subsequently, the Attorney General's office filed a civil charge against Ernest, seeking to classify him as a violent predator likely to reoffend. This move would enable prosecutors to have him committed indefinitely to a psychiatric facility, even without facing a trial in the criminal case. Ernest was held at the Eastern State Hospital in Williamsburg, New York, where he was required to stay and receive treatment as the prosecution built their case. During his time at the facility, he underwent several assessments, sometimes being deemed competent and other times showing signs of severe dementia. Trial date was postponed until 2021 due to the pandemic. In late 2021, a court hearing was conducted to decide whether Ernest would proceed to trial. A Virginia Circuit Court judge determined that there was probable cause to proceed with the trial to assess whether Ernest was likely to engage in violent behavior at his advanced age. This decision followed testimonies from Virginia Beach cold case detective Christy Curtis, clinical psychologist Michelle Scolander, and arguments from Ernest's attorney. Curtis recounted details from her interview with Ernest where he mentioned working at Dick's Restaurant on the oceanfront in Virginia Beach in the early 1970s and recalled Janice and Lynn as peep show girls. Dr. Scolander, who had evaluated Ernest's mental health and criminal history, testified that he posed a high risk of reoffending, exhibiting antisocial personality traits and acting in his own interests. Ernest's lawyer advocated for him to be given a chance. The attorney highlighted that his client had refrained from criminal activities since being released in 2013 and had exhibited positive behavior. Nevertheless, the trial would not proceed. In October 2022, Ernest Broadnax passed away at the age of 84 after facing various health issues at the Eastern State Hospital. Following the news of Ernest Broadnax's passing, Michael Pietropoulos issued a written statement to the media. He conveyed his dissatisfaction with the case's outcome but mentioned that they found solace in the belief that Ernest would be judged in death. The spokesperson for the Virginia Beach Commonwealth Attorney's Office responded to Michael's statement, sharing a similar sense of disappointment and frustration. She recognized that cases like this offer a glimpse into the minds of killers and can unsettle even the most resilient individuals. Sheila Josephine Harris, a young woman who had once won a beauty contest, tragically lost her life in her own apartment. The police initiated an investigation to find the perpetrator, unaware of the far-reaching impact it would have. Today, we will delve into the story of Sheila Josephine Harris and shed light on why this case sparked outrage among the public. Born on February 26, 1963, in Douglas County, Nevada, Sheila harbored dreams of pursuing a career as an actress or a model from a tender age. She actively participated in beauty contests during her school years, showcasing her talent and ambition. Despite facing personal challenges such as her parents' divorce and her mother's remarriage, Sheila remained resilient and caring towards her younger sisters. In her final year of high school, she clinched victory in a local beauty pageant and set her sights on competing for Miss Nevada and Miss Carson City. Her ultimate goal was to go for the national beauty title. Despite her lofty aspirations, Sheila chose to pursue higher education in business and trade after graduating from high school at 18. She relocated to Carson City, rented an apartment, and took up a part-time job at a supermarket to sustain herself. Diligently balancing her studies, work, and personal life, Sheila was determined to carve out a successful future for herself. She also shared a romantic relationship with Stephen Furlong, making efforts to spend quality time together amidst their busy schedules. On January 4, 1982, Sheila visited Stephen to check on his well-being after he suffered an arm injury. Following an evening spent with him and his parents, she bid farewell and headed home to rest before her early shift at the supermarket the next day. Despite Stephen's injury, he accompanied her to the entrance of her residential complex before parting ways. The following day, failed to appear at work. The store manager was surprised by her absence, as she had never been late before. After attempting to reach her by phone, he contacted Sheila's mother to inquire about her whereabouts. Initially, her mother assumed Sheila had overslept, but became anxious when she learned that the building manager had also tried to call her. Concerned, she decided to visit Sheila's apartment with a friend. Upon entering, they were met with a distressing scene. Sheila was found lifeless in her bed, surrounded by blood and visible bruises. Despite attempts to shield her from the sight, Sheila's mother also entered the apartment and discovered her deceased daughter. The police, upon arrival, began investigating the crime scene and determined that Sheila had been strangled and subjected to severe blows. A dent in the wall near the bed suggested she had attempted to defend herself. Furthermore, wood chips were discovered beneath the garments and the lifeless body. Forensic pathologists determined that the young lady had been bound and subjected to brutality. The assailant had struck her multiple times, likely with a plank or some other hefty piece of timber, and then strangled her with an electrical cord, resulting in her demise. The authorities were unable to locate either the plank or the cord in the residence, but they observed that the wire had been torn off the table lamp, potentially serving as the murder weapon. Specialists managed to retrieve biological material of the perpetrator, although DNA testing was not feasible in 1982. Initially, the investigator speculated that this heinous act may have been impulsive and that the culprit might have been mentally unstable. The savagery with which he tweeted his victim led them to this conclusion. However, it soon became apparent that this assault had been meticulously premeditated. Firstly, there were no signs of forced entry on the door, indicating that Sheila likely allowed the assailant inside herself. Secondly, none of the neighbors in the building heard anything amiss. The perpetrator must have meticulously planned each move to execute such a brutal crime without making a sound. Moreover, the assailant absconded with a wire and a wooden plank, depriving law enforcement of two crucial pieces of evidence. All of these factors led investigators to believe that the culprit was not a novice criminal, potentially a serial killer, or an individual who had been plotting the assault long before it occurred. With scant evidence, investigators commenced the search for eyewitnesses. They interrogated all of the building's occupants, yet none of them observed anything suspicious on that fateful night. Sheila's residence was situated on the outskirts of the city and was deemed unsafe. She selected the apartment due to its affordable rent, as her earnings from the supermarket did not allow her to reside in a more upscale neighborhood. The complexity of the situation only added to the burden of the police force, as numerous individuals in the vicinity were somehow entangled in illicit activities. Over the course of a month following the tragic incident, investigators meticulously scrutinized the local populace in an attempt to pinpoint potential suspects. Despite interrogating approximately 70 men, they were unable to establish any concrete connections. Right from the outset, Sheila's boyfriend, Stephen, emerged as the most conspicuous suspect. Historical data indicates that individuals in close proximity to the victim are often the perpetrators of such heinous acts, and Stephen happened to be the last person to have seen Sheila before her untimely demise. Although he claimed to have escorted her to the entrance, detectives remained skeptical. The young man lacked an alibi for the remainder of the day and failed to substantiate his claim of not entering Sheila's apartment. Complicating matters further, the local media caught wind of Stephen's status as a suspect. Journalists swiftly uncovered his familial ties to law enforcement. His brother held the position of sheriff in Carson City, while his father had previously occupied the same role before retiring. Consequently, newspapers began speculating about potential cover-ups by the police, inciting uproar among city residents. The populace of Carson City was convinced that Stephen was the culprit and that his family members were exploiting their influence to shield him from justice. This led to public demonstrations, scathing letters directed at Stephen and his kin, and even threats of violence. The citizens of Carson City demanded the immediate arrest of the teenager, with some going as far as advocating for capital punishment. The situation was further muddled when, just days after Sheila's tragic demise, Stephen was apprehended for public intoxication. Nonetheless, investigators persisted in their quest to ascertain a possible motive behind the crime. Following discussions with Sheila's acquaintances, they deduced that the couple had never encountered any significant issues, that the young woman had never voiced concerns about Stephen's behavior. Moreover, the victim sustained severe injuries that necessitated the killer to exert considerable effort, and Stephen had a fractured arm during that period, rendering it nearly impossible for him to commit the crime. Consequently, the detective started to lean towards the presumption of the boy's innocence, albeit belatedly. Faced with public pressure, threats, and constant accusations, Stephen tragically took his own life before he could be fully exonerated. Subsequently, the police had a sole suspect for the role of the perpetrator, a gardener and handyman named David Winfield Mitchell, who was responsible for the maintenance of the residential complex where Sheila resided. While there was no direct evidence against him, various circumstantial factors raised suspicions among investigators. Firstly, the man had access to every apartment in the complex for repair purposes. Secondly, shortly after the murder, he abruptly resigned and disappeared without a trace. Despite efforts to locate him, he remained elusive. As suspicions intensified against Mitchell, detectives conducted further interviews with residents and staff of the complex. They inquired about any peculiar or suspicious conduct exhibited by the gardener, and multiple witnesses reported that Mitchell displayed an unsettling fixation on attractive young women, observing them intently until they were out of sight. This behavior raised concerns among tenants, leading investigators to increasingly believe that he was responsible for Sheila's death. A manhunt was launched, but over the ensuing years, authorities were unable to uncover any leads on his whereabouts. Meanwhile, forensic experts discovered a hair in the victim's apartment that potentially belonged to Mitchell. Hailing from the Caribbean nation of Trinidad and Tobago, the hair's ethnicity matched his background. However, due to the unavailability of DNA analysis at the time, a definitive match with Mitchell's DNA could not be established. In 1986, 4 years following the tragic incident, authorities were finally provided with a lead on the individual's location. Culprit had been residing outside the jurisdiction and was promptly apprehended. During interrogation, Mitchell vehemently denied any involvement, leaving the detectives with only a single piece of evidence, a strand of hair believed to be his. The suspect maintained that he had tidied up the residence a month prior to Sheila's occupancy, offering an explanation for the hair's presence. Despite investigators' strong suspicions, the lack of substantial proof meant that the case would not stand in court. Consequently, Mitchell was released as no judge would convict him based solely on a single hair that could have innocently been left behind during cleaning. Since then, there have been no further developments in the perplexing case. The investigators strongly believed Mitchell was the killer, leading them to focus solely on him and neglect other potential suspects. Despite their conviction, they lacked concrete evidence to prove his guilt, causing the investigation to stall. It wasn't until 1999, 13 years later, that the case was reopened. Sheila's mother, aware of advancements in DNA analysis, reached out to the detective overseeing the case. She persuaded him to send the killer's biological material for testing and compare it with Mitchell's blood, which was collected during questioning in 1986. After a lengthy wait, the results finally arrived, confirming a complete match between the semen sample from the victim's body and David Mitchell's DNA. Additionally, experts verified that the hair found in the victim's apartment belonged to him. This provided the police with irrefutable evidence of his guilt. However, a new challenge arose as Mitchell had left the USA and secured a job as a security guard in his home country's government institution. The extradition of Mitchell posed a significant challenge for investigators as they navigated through the intricate bureaucratic procedures and presented compelling evidence to the government of Trinidad and Tobago. This arduous process spanned over several years, with federal and state authorities engaging in prolonged negotiations with the other state. It wasn't until 2006 that a final decision was reached to extradite him. The suspect was transported to Carson City, and shortly thereafter, one of the most high-profile trials in the state's history commenced. Initially, DNA analysis was not as widely utilized as it is today, and this technology still sparked some skepticism in society. Additionally, journalists focused heavily on the fact that the victim's body friend, Stephen, had taken his own life due to accusations against him, leading the court to determine whether Stephen was the true perpetrator or if the entire town had wrongly believed Stephen was guilty. Mitchell's attorney capitalized on these uncertainties in his defense strategy, asserting that Stephen was the actual culprit and that DNA analysis could be fallible. The prosecution countered these arguments, presenting compelling evidence that DNA testing under modern conditions has an extremely low margin of error. Furthermore, they raised an indirect argument. On the day of the murder, Stephen had a cast on his hand. Firstly, it was unlikely that the young man could have inflicted all the injuries on the victim using only one hand. Secondly, traces of the cast would have undoubtedly been found at the crime scene, yet none were discovered. However, these were not the only points made by the prosecution. Throughout the trial, they disclosed information that had not been publicly available before. It was revealed that Mitchell had previously been convicted of 5 instances of violence against women in the late 1960s. While living in New York, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for attacking 3 young women in their homes. Mitchell had broken into their residences, bound the women with an electric cable, and subjected them to violence. Following his release from prison, he relocated to California, where in 1979, broke into the home of 2 sisters and attempted to assault them. Fortunately, the young women were able to fend him off and contact the authorities, leading to Mitchell's arrest 9 months later. The most intriguing part commenced here. Despite his previous sentence, the man only served 1.5 years of his 3-year prison term and was released on parole. He was supposed to be deported to his homeland, but he vanished from the police and relocated to Carson City, where he found employment as a gardener in the same complex. These events not only outraged Sheila's family, but also the public. If the system had not allowed him to be released so early, the young woman would likely still be alive. The residential complex management also unknowingly hired a serial rapist who had fled from the police. The investigators' work also raised questions. After Sheila's murder, they had no knowledge of Mitchell's criminal history. According to the prosecution, on the evening of Sheila's murder, Mitchell knocked on her door and claimed he needed to do some repair work. He should have had a board with him, which he used to stun the victim. Then Mitchell committed these atrocities and left the scene, taking the board and the electric cable with him. The jury took only 30 minutes to unanimously find Mitchell guilty of the young woman's murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, but his lawyer attempted to secure more lenient conditions. He argued that for 25 years after the murder, Mitchell had reformed, lived an honest life, and had not harmed anyone. Fortunately, the court rejected these demands and upheld the original sentence. When he began his prison term, David was 63 years old. Sheila's mother expressed gratitude to the court for not allowing this monster to walk free. She stated that had he not been released early in the early 1980s, her daughter would still be alive. Throughout the narrative, a lingering inquiry troubled investigators. How many additional victims might Mitchell have had? Given the unmistakably serial nature of his known transgressions, it is plausible that the perpetrator targeted other individuals. Having evaded law enforcement for 25 years, there exists a significant likelihood that his deeds inflicted harm upon others. Yet the uncertainty remains as to whether authorities will succeed in revealing the complete truth. Carrie Nelson, a young woman of grace and ambition, tragically met her demise at her place of work. Despite the best efforts of detectives, the culprit remained elusive, leaving the case unsolved for several years. However, a surprising turn of events unfolded when the police revisited the evidence, leading to a breakthrough that no one could have foreseen. Born on December 13, 1980, in the quaint town of Luverne, Minnesota, Carrie was a beacon of light in the lives of her loving parents, younger sister, and numerous friends. Her compassionate nature and unwavering dedication to helping others shone through in every aspect of her life. Pursuing her dream of becoming a doctor, Carrie embarked on her academic journey at a college in North Dakota, where she crossed paths with the charming Mike Kellen, with whom she soon became engaged. Despite the demands of her studies, took on a part-time job at the National Blue Mound State Park, a place she held dear to her heart. Selling tickets and guiding visitors through the park's wonders, Carrie found solace in the beauty of nature that surrounded her. The tranquil landscapes provided a respite from the hustle and bustle of everyday life, allowing her to immerse herself in the serenity of the great outdoors. On May 20, 2001, she arrived at work as usual. That day, she was accompanied by a young intern named Rebecca, who was assisting her at the park. Apart from her regular tasks, she had to guide and familiarize Rebecca with the work procedures. Her shift began at 8 a.m. and was scheduled to end at 3:30 p.m. throughout the day. She dedicated her time to explaining the intricacies of the job to Rebecca. At approximately 12:45, Rebecca left for the office building situated at the opposite end of the park, leaving her alone in a small room near the entrance. Upon Rebecca's return around 2:30 p.m., she was met with a distressing sight. Carrie was lying lifeless on the floor with a pool of blood nearby. Simultaneously, a startled Rebecca heard a noise at the front door. Fearing it might be the same individual who harmed her colleague, she swiftly exited through the back door and hurried home. As her residence was within the park premises due to her father's managerial position, she promptly informed her parents about the incident. Her father rushed to the scene while her mother contacted the authorities. Upon arrival, he discovered Carrie's lifeless body and promptly contacted emergency services. Meanwhile, another call was made to the police by a park visitor who stumbled upon the scene. Law enforcement initiated their investigation, finding Carrie's body behind the registration desk in a disarrayed state. The room bore signs of a struggle with scattered items and a broken pen. Based on the evidence gathered, the authorities deduced that a confrontation occurred between the victim and the assailant. Following discussions with the managers, it was revealed that 2 bank bags designated for storing money had gone missing from the premises. Furthermore, cash was taken from the register amounting to approximately $2,000. Detectives discovered various clues on the floor, including men's wristwatches with torn straps and a pack of cigarettes. Given that Carrie was a non-smoker, it was presumed that the cigarettes were left behind by her murderer. The watches, on the other hand, were believed to have been ripped off the perpetrator's wrist during the altercation. Notably, orange-colored stone particles were also found on the floor, which the manager indicated likely originated from the decorative stone at the park's registration desk. Despite an extensive search of the premises, the culprit remained elusive. The presence of blood spatters on the room's walls and ceiling led investigators to suspect that the stone was the murder weapon. Meanwhile, the park entrance was secured and other investigators began interviewing all incoming visitors. A couple at the campground mentioned seeing a white car with a brown vinyl top speeding past them around 2:30 p.m., but were unable to recall the vehicle's model or license plate number. The absence of surveillance cameras in the park posed a challenge as crimes in the area were infrequent. The available evidence included a wristwatch, a pack of cigarettes, and the vague recollections of witnesses. Medical experts determined that the victim's fatal injuries were caused by blunt force trauma to the head. While it was speculated that a large decorative stone might have been the murder weapon, they awaited its discovery. Investigators revealed that the assault on Carrie took place between 2 p.m. and 2:30 p.m. A heartfelt letter penned by Carrie to her betrothed was discovered at her workplace, expressing her excitement for their upcoming nuptials and her dream of having 2 children. The letter was dated 2 p.m. on the day of the incident. Intriguingly, a men's watch found near the victim's body had stopped at 2:16 p.m., hinting that it ceased ticking shortly after Carrie had removed it from the assailant's wrist. The authorities swiftly secured the park, scouring for more evidence. After 5 days, they stumbled upon a decorative stone in a nearby stream. Apparently, the culprit had taken it and flung it into the water from a bridge while driving past. Forensic specialists matched the stone's relief with Carrie's head injuries, confirming it as the murder weapon. Unfortunately, the water had obliterated any fingerprints or DNA traces left by the perpetrator. With no other leads, the police turned their attention to a potential suspect. Initially focusing on Carrie's fiancé, they discovered he had a solid alibi. He was at a funeral 110 kilometers away from the crime scene at the time of the murder. Further investigations led them to a colleague of Carrie's, Stephen, who had a troubling history. Stephen persistently pursued Carrie despite her engagement, sold narcotics to park visitors, and made her feel unsafe. Carrie had contemplated reporting him to the authorities or management. When questioned, Stephen failed to provide a credible alibi for the time of the crime. He abstained from work on that particular day, asserting that he was attending his daughter's birthday celebration a few kilometers away from the park. Nevertheless, he made an appearance at the festivity around 3 p.m., indicating that he had sufficient time to engage in the unlawful act. Furthermore, he was seen driving a white Cadillac, whereas witnesses observed a light-colored vehicle speeding away from the park. Upon further investigation, the detectives discovered that Stephen was facing financial hardships, providing him with a motive to commit theft, especially since he was aware of the location where the money was stored. The detectives also speculated that he might have become aware of Carrie's intentions to report him and opted to eliminate her. They impounded his vehicle and obtained a DNA sample from him. Meanwhile, the forensic team completed the collection of fingerprints and DNA samples from the crime scene, including DNA from a man's wristwatch. A total of 135 distinct fingerprints were identified at the location. After excluding all park staff, including Stephen, 38 unknown prints remained. Regarding the wristwatch, 3 different DNA samples were detected on it. The challenge arose when these samples were insufficient to generate a complete profile due to the limited advancement of DNA analysis technology in 2001. Consequently, experts had to work with partial profiles. Despite attempting to input them into databases, the outcomes were inconclusive. The system presented them with 19 potential matches, and upon investigation, the police confirmed that none of these individuals were linked to the homicide. Nonetheless, the experts managed to directly compare the acquired samples with other DNA. They determined that one of the samples belonged to Carrie, while the other 2 did not correspond to any of the park employees, including Stephen. The detectives refrained from hastily eliminating him as a suspect since he possessed both motive and opportunity to perpetrate the crime, albeit lacking concrete evidence against him. No alternative lead surfaced, and the case remained unresolved for several months. A year following the murder, an inmate incarcerated in the local penitentiary approached the authorities. He informed them that his cellmate, Anthony Flowers, had bragged to him about being the one responsible for Carrie's murder. After a thorough investigation, it was discovered that Flowers had a lengthy criminal record, primarily for bank robberies, which had led to multiple incarcerations. Interestingly, Flowers had escaped from prison shortly before Carrie's murder, only to be apprehended later. Surprisingly, his fingerprints and DNA did not match those found at the crime scene. Furthermore, the witness's account of the murder did not align with the actual events. The detectives deduced that both inmates were attempting to mislead them in hopes of claiming a $50,000 reward for information that would help solve the case. Since Flowers was already serving a life sentence, additional charges did not faze him. Moreover, if found guilty, he could avoid being transferred to a federal prison and remain in the state correctional facility, a scenario he preferred. The case remained unresolved for several years. Detectives diligently revisited the case, anticipating new evidence, but their endeavors proved futile. They even displayed a photo of Carrie in their office to serve as a daily reminder of the case. In 2007, the case was reopened. By then, advancements in DNA analysis technology allowed experts to re-examine the wristwatch. This time, they successfully identified 3 distinct DNA profiles. One belonging to Carrie, the second to an unidentified man, and the third to an unidentified woman. Both samples were cross-referenced with the state database, but no matches were found. It was then that the detectives recalled a crucial detail. A unique sticker was discovered on the pack of cigarettes found near the victim's body. During that period, each state was required to label tobacco products, confirming that the pack was purchased in South Dakota. Subsequently, the detectives forwarded the DNA samples to their counterparts in that state, leading to a long-awaited breakthrough. When the profiles were run against the South Dakota database, one of them resulted in a perfect match. The individual turned out to be none other than 35-year-old Randy Lee Royal Swaney. Surprisingly, this name had never surfaced in any police reports related to Carrie's case, leaving the investigators taken aback. It was revealed that Randy was a serial robber, currently serving a 30-month sentence in a South Dakota prison, having been out on parole at the time of the murder. Furthermore, the police discovered that he owned a light-colored Oldsmobile Delta, which aligned with the witness's description. Upon checking his fingerprints, they found several matches at the murder scene. Despite this, the detectives aimed to gather more evidence before pressing charges. With only a month left in his prison sentence, the police decided to act swiftly. They approached his wife, withholding the suspicions against her husband. Unfazed by the visit, the woman confirmed that the photos of a watch belonged to her husband, even admitting to occasionally wearing them. It was then realized that her DNA was the last sample found on the watch. Upon revealing their suspicions, the woman broke down in tears, primarily out of fear for herself. When the detectives attempted to speak with Randy in prison, he refused to cooperate without legal representation. Subsequently, he called his wife, unaware that the police were listening in on the conversation. The woman expressed her frustration and demanded an explanation from him. She disclosed that detectives were looking into him regarding a murder at Blue Mound State Park, and she was particularly concerned about her DNA being discovered on a watch. She became emotional, alternating between tears and outbursts, vehemently denying any involvement in the crime to avoid going to jail. On the contrary, maintained his innocence throughout. The woman willingly assisted the authorities by providing DNA samples, allowing a search of their residence and submitting various photos of Randy, one of which depicted him seated in a white car resembling the one witnessed at the scene. In another photo, his watch was visible, secured to the fourth clasp mirroring the one found at the crime scene. Furthermore, his wife confirmed that Randy smoked the same brand of cigarettes found near the victim. These pieces of evidence were sufficient to proceed with the trial. Randy was formally charged on May 8, 2007, just a day before his scheduled release. He was promptly transferred to a Minnesota prison and the prosecution began preparing for the trial. According to their narrative, Randy initially targeted the park building for an easy robbery due to the absence of security measures. Although there were no cameras or guards, there was cash available. Upon entering, he may have encountered Carrie in another room. Upon realizing the absence of witnesses, Randy began stealing money from the register. But Carrie returned and caught him in the act. A confrontation ensued, during which Randy possibly resorted to threats to coerce her into opening the safe. Subsequently, he used a decorative stone to strike her multiple times out of fear of leaving a witness behind. Even his own family members, including his wife, testified against him in court, detailing his history of theft, substance abuse, and severe gambling addiction. That led to significant deaths. His former cellmate recounted how Randy mentioned leaving his watch at the crime scene. Another inmate shared that following the police interrogation in jail, Randy uttered, "This time they caught me. I'm facing a lifetime behind bars." Despite Randy's legal team's claims of innocence, the DNA analysis revealed conflicting evidence. 3 genetic samples were found on the watch: Randy's, his wife's, and Carrie's. Randy's alibi of fishing 150 kilometers away from the park on the day of the murder could not be verified as he was supposedly alone. His fingerprints were discovered on a leaflet created just 4 days before the crime, further weakening his defense. Despite attempts to shift blame onto others, including harassing the victim's fiancé, Randy was ultimately found guilty after a lengthy trial. His appeals were all denied, leaving no room for his case to be reconsidered. Westchester, Ohio, home to 23-year-old Ellen Wyke, known to everyone as Ellie. Originally from Minneapolis, Minnesota, she and her family moved to Westchester, where Ellie now lived alone, with her pet gecko, Gail. Her family said she lived a life full of color, music, art, and nature. Described as a free-spirited, creative soul, you could often find her scrapbooking, taking dance classes, making jewelry, or writing. She loved the outdoors, and her mom said since she was little you could always find her digging around outside in her nicest dresses, covered in dirt, planting things and building hammocks. She had a lot of exciting things coming up and had recently got her cosmetology license. But as the summer of 2018 crept in, her ever-positive outlook was being pushed to its limit. An unknown person had been sending her harassing messages and DMs via masked numbers, random usernames, Snapchat accounts, and Instagram and Facebook profiles. It had been happening on and off for almost a year, but now it was relentless. She felt confident from the way they spoke that it was all the same person, just using different devices and platforms. Things got even more frightening when Ellie got sent part of a video on Facebook. It had been filmed from right outside her house. The person was watching her at her kitchen table, exposing themselves and touching themselves as they filmed. Several more videos of a similar nature followed. If the messages weren't scary enough, this had all just taken a very sinister turn. How had this person found her house? Her best friend Hannah described it as a serious and sick game of cat and mouse. Enough was enough, and Ellie called the police. She reported some of the usernames and numbers, one of which was Mikhail or Mika. Did that name mean anything to her, they asked. Ellie said she had an ex from years ago called Michael, but she had no clue who could be behind this. Officers wrote up a report, and Ellie asked them what she should do next. They told her to take self-defense classes and stay inside at night. Ellie, defeated and not confident this would change anything, still agreed and signed up to some classes with her mom Tam, but the harassment carried on. Police couldn't determine where the messages were coming from, as they were masked numbers from websites with random area codes, and the challenge of diving into this digital data would take some time. But not long after Ellie called them, her mom, Tam, called the police again, asking to log more information. The police came out to Ellie's house and patrolled the area 2 times that same week, but they didn't see anything nefarious. However, according to police records, the total time spent on both searches was just 5 minutes. It got to the point where Ellie didn't want to be in her house by herself, and her friends would take it in turns to sleep over. But this person clearly had no problem approaching her house, and the reality was, until they were caught, how safe could she ever really feel? In one conversation, her friend said, "What do you do in this situation? I wish I knew how to help." Replied, "I don't know," with a sad face. "I'm alone and don't know a lot of self-defense. It's taking all of my peace of mind." One day, when Ellie was chatting with a friend about everything going on, they both suddenly had a realization, and it came via a new Snapchat account. The account was registered to Mikhail Strauss, and Ellie's ex-boyfriend was Michael Strauss. Despite thinking that it couldn't possibly be him, Ellie, seeing the username, realized that it was. She immediately texted her friend, "Damn it, I know who it is. My ex-boyfriend from when I was 17. He and Ellie had broken up ages ago. They shared a similar love of art, music and festivals, and initially had a lot in common. But things went south quickly, and she cut off contact." She updated the police on her findings. On July 28th, she was texting her online friend, Nate. They had both spoken about hanging out in person many times and even made plans to meet that day. Nate said, "I'm not bringing my phone. Is it cool if I just knock?" But it seemed that later, Ellie changed her mind and just wanted to stay in. "What's this I'm hearing about some creep following you though?" Nate asked. "LOL, no one is creepy to me, so I don't know." Ellie replied. He asked what she was up to, and she said she was just by herself. She didn't have any friends over as usual, so she was just heading to bed alone. As Ellie locked everything up and went through her now usual routine of taping her curtain shut, little did she realize she wasn't talking to Nate. It was just another fake number and fake name. And now Michael Strauss knew she was home alone. August 1st, 2018. When people couldn't get hold of over the following days, her panicked mom, Tam, reported her missing. There was no doubt in anyone's mind this was all connected to the stalking. Her car was still parked outside her house, and there was no activity on her phone or bank cards. One question for the police was Ellie's phone analyzed before she disappeared to try and identify her stalker? But the Westchester police declined to comment. It was determined that her case was classified not as stalking but as telecommunication harassment. One of the numbers connected to Nate had a 213 area code, and the number had been purchased via a website, but it had no previous data and was not linked to another phone. It had also not been active since the day Ellie went missing. Over the next 2 weeks, as the search for Ellie was on, detectives got some information from the website the number had been purchased from, and they were able to obtain a username, sign-up date, last login, and email associated with the account. It was all linked to her ex-boyfriend, Michael Strauss. Michael had a criminal history going back a decade, which included public indecency, drug possession, identity fraud, and burglary. The public indecency charge in June of 2015 led to a mental health evaluation and a court-mandated follow-up treatment for 1 year. He had also created other new numbers to start contacting other women, and even started a new account via the same website a mere 53 minutes after the last message was sent to using the 213 area code. August 24th, tragically less than a month after she was reported missing, a discovery was made. Ellie's body was found off of a rural road in a field. She was naked, wrapped in a blanket, bound with duct tape, and had a plastic bag over her head. Her cause of death was asphyxiation. Just a short walk across the field from where I was found lived Michael. And at 4 a.m. the following day, Westchester police placed him under arrest. Held on a $4 million bond, he sat in custody while investigators tore his house apart and went through all of his devices. Google had turned over information to the police, showing that an IP address registered to Michael's residence had made searches for how long does a dead body smell, missing girl in Hamilton, and missing girl in Westchester, Ohio. Ellie Wyke was also searched for on Google, as well as 3 searches for the Cincinnati Strangler. On July 18th, a matter of days before she had gone missing, more searches were made for how to survive prison and a survivor's guide to prison, followed by how to delete photos off her iCloud account. There were searches for forced rape while jogging and teen forced porn. Police said other searches he made were so disturbing they would not reveal them. They found numerous videos of joggers he had filmed over the months, following them in cars and around parks. Investigators had also found a screenshot on Michael's phone taken from the Maps app of a field where the police discovered Ellie's body. Michael was unbothered and gave some vague excuse about doing research for a script he was working on as he was in the film industry. At his house, they found the most damning piece of evidence so far. Inside his art portfolio, police found Ellie's driver's license, a lock of her hair, and her pink necklace. The interviewing officers were now losing their patience with the cocky and arrogant Michael. They wanted the truth. When they put everything to him, he told police it was all an accident. He said Ellie had agreed to shoot a torture porn video with him, something he was often paid to make for thousands of dollars. Michael said that whilst shooting it, Ellie had died accidentally from suffocation because a plastic bag was over her head. He said the cameras were already rolling and he accidentally recorded her death, watched it back, then deleted it and threw the memory card away. That video, if it indeed existed, has never surfaced. When they searched his basement, they found handcuffs still attached to a bed down there. Obviously, detectives did not believe for a second that Ellie had agreed to anything like this. However, it painted a terrifying picture of her last moments. She had clearly been forced out of her house by Michael and taken to his property. 29-year-old Michael Strauss was indicted by a grand jury on 9 charges: aggravated murder, 3 counts of tampering with evidence, menacing by stalking, petty theft, abuse of a corpse, and gross abuse of a corpse. On September 1st, Ellie's funeral was held and everyone was encouraged to wear tie-dye and bring something to stick in a scrapbook. People could bring drums to make music too, and the whole day would be a reflection of everything that Ellie loved. Any funds raised would go towards planting a tree for her, and a day later a celebration of life took place. The investigation had been extensive, and there were more than 800 pages of evidence submitted to the court. During a court appearance, Michael's defense team presented their theory about how Ellie had died. Despite his admission, they wanted the court to grant them access to her medical records and therapist notes. And although they did not elaborate, they implied that her depression could have caused her to maybe misuse her medication and maybe this had killed her. Considering the autopsy findings and the way she was found in the field, the prosecution said it was not only a convoluted theory, it was just downright insulting. But no trial would ever take place, as Michael Strauss would eventually plead guilty to killing Ellie. However, a guilty plea in this case would mean a far lesser sentence, as 6 of the initial charges against him were dismissed. Ellie's dad David said, "My God tells me to forgive, but he doesn't say when, and I don't know if I'll ever get to that." And Michael's own mother addressed Ellie's family, offering her deepest sympathies and feeling sick over everything that had happened. The judge gave the maximum sentence he possibly could, but it was still a punch in the gut for Ellie's family and friends. Michael was sentenced to 17.5 years behind bars, 15 years to life for murder, 18 months for menacing by stalking, and 1 year for abuse of a corpse. The sentences will run consecutively. Accounting for credit for time served, he will first be eligible for parole in just 2036 and again in 2041. The judge called it unfortunate that Michael's case did not qualify for life in prison without the possibility of parole, but his hands were tied. There is still no understanding as to what motivated him to do this. The prosecution said they could only speculate, but they think the motive in this case was perversity. Mr. Strauss was the author, director, producer of his own twisted movie. This case reads like a crime novel, but a horror novel at that. That's what is so scary about all of this and so heartbreaking, is she did what you're told to do. She did all of the right things and it still happened. Where is the closure in that? Said her best friend Hannah. After an internal investigation of the handling of Ellie's many calls to the police, the Westchester's police chief ordered a 40-hour unpaid suspension of an officer after it was shown that he had violated procedures. Officer James Thomas failed to thoroughly document information and conduct a proper investigation when Ellie filed her report on April 11, 2018. Officer Thomas needed a stronger sense of urgency and attention to detail when investigating this case to ensure the safety of the victim. That did not occur, the report read in part. The report did not document that Ellie had an ex-boyfriend named Michael, his last name or address. The potential link to the name Mikhail or Mika was not looked into. The emails and videos Ellie turned over were not added to the report. The officer did not document that he had received an email from Ellie on the 1st of May, 2018 with additional texts, and he did not scan the messages into the report or log them. Michael Strauss is also a suspect in various other cases. Michael's old inmate claimed that he told them he had killed another woman named Shelley and dumped her body in a creek. He described it in exactly the same way as he described Ellie's murder. But Westchester police were not able to verify this claim, and they do not know who this person is. In January 2018, a female jogger was attacked by a man in a black hoodie and face mask. She was jogging her normal route when the man grabbed her by the face and neck and pulled her into a grassy area and ordered her to be quiet. She fought him off and managed to get away. As can be seen from Michael's many videos, he clearly had an obsession with watching and following female runners. So this is something the police likely think he was involved in. Given how disturbed and violent Michael has already shown he is, one has to wonder how many victims he really has. In the United States alone, an estimated 13.5 million people are stalked in a one-year period, and nearly 1 in 3 women and 1 in 6 men have experienced stalking victimization at some point in their lifetime. And in 94% of murder cases, stalking behavior was identified in various ways and forms. One officer said that stalking can often look like watching a murder in slow motion. Her mom, Tam, said every second her brain isn't thinking of something or focused on something, the thought of her daughter comes in. I am haunted by the fear and horror Ellie felt, looking at her murderer through plastic with tape around her neck and her wrists as Ellie took her last breath. She said, Ellie Wyke clearly touched a lot of lives. Her cousin said, we just wanted to bring some color back into the darkness. I don't think closure will ever come, to be honest. It's something that gets easier to manage on a day-to-day basis, but there will never be closure. Ellie is a part of this family and always will be a part of this family. We'll see her again, we know that. It'll just be a long break till we see her again. When her body was found, a rainbow was over the field and the sun was bright right in the spot that she was. Her family always think of this as a sign that she was watching over them that day, telling them that it was going to be okay and thanking them for finding her. It reminds them to always see the brightness, always see the color, even when things are so dark and gray. Fargo, North Dakota, 2009. Home to 49-year-old Philip Gattuso. His older brother Roy described him as a big softy, always polite and friendly, a great listener and a very gentle person. He was a well-respected and well-known dentist running his own practice for the last 7 years. His patients loved him and said his calming demeanor and big smile made a sometimes scary visit much easier. After high school, he had gained his biological sciences degree in Louisiana. Before settling on dentistry, he met and married his first wife, and the couple had 2 sons, Philip Jr. and Joseph. The couple would eventually split, and Philip made the move to Oklahoma City to take some extra courses in the hopes of running his own practice. And it was here that he met a music-loving waitress, Valerie. He asked to take her out on the same day and fell head over heels for her. They shared a love of jazz, cooking and travel, and married in 2001. By 2003, Philip's career was really on the up, and he had finally achieved his dream of taking over a practice. He and Valerie moved into a condo on South University Drive and soon welcomed their daughter, Kennedy. Sometime after Valerie became pregnant, however, she started having heart trouble, and after she gave birth, she was scheduled in for surgery to repair a mitral valve. 2 weeks after this photo was taken, and when Kennedy was just 2 years old, Valerie underwent heart surgery, but it resulted in a serious complication. She had to be medically sedated for 2 months, staying in hospital for a total of 9 months, battling organ failure, blood infections, and mini strokes. Valerie's family and Philip were fighting about where Valerie should receive her treatment. Her family said Oklahoma City was one of the few places with a doctor that specialized in what she needed, and this was also where her parents lived. But Philip, after lengthy research himself, believed he had found a local hospital that would provide the best treatment and give her a better chance of getting a heart transplant. After much conversation, Valerie and Kennedy ended up moving in to live with Jean and Sharon in Oklahoma. Phil had been trying to take as much time off to be with her as he could, but with a mortgage and mounting medical bills along with everything else, he had to carry on working, and Valerie would feel a little safer knowing that there would be people in the house all the time. He was upset about the move and didn't want to be away from Kennedy, but he knew that it would be more comforting for Valerie to have her there. Tragically for everyone, Valerie sadly died. Kennedy came back to live with Philip, and although he was being as strong as he could for his now 3-year-old, friends said he felt like his world had been damaged beyond the point of repair. He said he felt like he had been grieving her loss for a long time already, as he knew deep down she would never fully recover and things could never be the same. But no one could believe she was gone. As heartbroken as he was, he never let Kennedy see his pain. He grieved privately and cried alone, keeping everything as normal as possible for her. It was business as usual, coloring and games before breakfast, work at the practice, and dinner and movies for when Kennedy came home. October 26, 2009 at 8:30 a.m. Philip dropped Kennedy off at her daycare and headed back home for a 10:30 a.m. conference call. Now it was just him and his daughter, and with no family nearby, he had started putting things in place to scale back his working hours, and he had scheduled this call to start handing things over almost 12 hours later, just after 7 p.m. A good friend of Valerie and Philip's, Julie Willett, got an unexpected phone call from Kennedy's daycare. When Valerie passed away, Julie and her husband really stepped up to help Philip, and she was one of the few people listed as an emergency contact for Kennedy. The daycare said that Kennedy was still waiting for her dad. Philip had not turned up to get her, and they hadn't been able to contact him all afternoon. This had never happened before, and Julie knew something had to be wrong. Worrying he'd fallen at the house and hurt himself, she started phoning around to try and get someone to pick Kennedy up as she and one of Philip's neighbors went to his condo. All the doors and windows were locked, so the neighbor climbed the fence to try and get in through the back door of the garage. Peering inside, he noticed Philip's Porsche was missing. They managed to get the garage door open and get inside. The condo was a total mess. Drawers were open, photo frames and paintings had been knocked off the wall. There was smashed glass and furniture was overturned. It had been totally ransacked, and there was no sign of Philip. It was silent when they called out. It seemed whoever had done this was long gone. Tentatively went towards the master bedroom, and it was here that she found her friend. Philip was lying on the floor, his head surrounded by blood. Julie described it as an out-of-body experience and said she watched herself calling 911 and she can't remember what she did. Soon the police, ambulances, and local media are outside. Kennedy stayed with Julie that night, and she didn't understand what was going on. So the Willets decided to try and make it a fun sleepover. Kennedy asked all night when her dad was coming to get her, until finally at 3 a.m. she fell asleep. Police started calling around Philip's family members with the news, but almost everyone lived out of state and wouldn't be able to get into town for a while. They called Jean and Sharon Kirkpatrick too, Valerie's parents, and they were terribly upset. The detectives said for this to happen so soon after losing their own daughter, it was a nightmare. Kennedy was now without anyone, and Jean and Sharon got ready for the almost 900-mile trip to bring her back to their house. It seemed that robbery was the motive, and then the burglar or burglars realized Philip was in his bedroom. He had tried to fight them off, and they had killed him before stealing almost everything, including his Porsche. There were missing TVs, laptops, cash, cameras, DVD players. The police said you name it, if it was electronic or worth a decent amount, it was gone. The autopsy showed that Philip had been beaten to death, and the shape of the wounds indicated that the murder weapon was something with a circular impact area, like a hammer. He had been hit on the head at least 10 times, and his skull was so fractured the examiner said it was like broken glass dropped on the floor. Detectives determined that he had never made his conference call, so he must have been killed between about 8:45 and 10:30 a.m. Knowing this made them question things even more. It was clearly not only a violent attack, it felt very personal, and ultimately it was just so risky to do this in broad daylight with everyone coming and going to work and dropping their kids off at school. It was definitely unusual. There were no signs of a forced entry either. No broken windows or damaged locks. So did Philip know his killer? Whoever had done this had been in the house a long time. They were in no rush and took their time clearing everything out. It seemed they knew that they would not be interrupted and that no one else would come home. Jean and Sharon, along with their daughter, Reagan, soon arrived to pick Kennedy up. Sharon called Julie and asked her to bring Kennedy to a restaurant to meet them. Julie reminded them that it was the middle of a murder investigation and perhaps they should all stick around for now, so she invited them over for lunch. It seemed they were processing so much that they didn't ask questions and didn't want any answers. The police said that Kirkpatricks were allowed to take Kennedy back with them and Reagan's family were given temporary custody. But before they left, Valerie's dad Gene spoke to the police. He couldn't think of any enemies that his son-in-law had or that he had issues with anyone. But he did mention that Philip liked to go to the casino. He was a big poker player, and the only thing that kept him wondering was that Philip might have owed someone money. It would surely explain why so much had been stolen too. Officers spoke to some of the regulars at the casino, and a lot of them did know Philip. They were shocked to hear about what had happened to him, but were not aware that he owed anyone any money. He was a good player, they laughed. He rarely lost out. It had seemed a really promising lead, but it didn't look like an occasional game of cards held the answer to what had happened to him. With no witnesses in any of the neighboring condos, detectives were hoping that there might be something on a few cameras around the area and that they would get a hit on Philip's car's number plate. Philip's house was surrounded by lots of shops and restaurants, and the bowling alley just across from his place did offer up some footage. The owner showed them that at 7:30 a.m. a pickup truck with a trailer at the back had pulled in, driven around to face the road and just parked up. No one got out, and given the fact they didn't open until 11 a.m., it was just a strange time. There were only 3 other cars parked there, but the owner said they were the same each morning. It was just other workers starting their early shift. This truck had really stood out to him, and he couldn't put his finger on why. 16 minutes later, at 7:46 a.m., the truck's lights had flashed and someone got out. They couldn't tell anything about the person, but they were walking in the direction of Philip's condo. Another camera opposite showed someone walking quickly, moving behind buildings as they went, but it was only their legs in frame. At 10:46 a.m., what looked like it could be a light Porsche came driving down the road. Philip was already dead by this time, so whoever was driving that car was definitely his killer. It headed into the parking lot of an apartment building just to the right of the bowling alley. The tow truck then pulled out and drove in the same direction, and at 11:30 a.m. both the truck and the trailer now towing the Porsche drove back in the opposite direction. A resident in the apartment building told investigators that at about 11 a.m. that morning, she had looked out of her window to see a dark pickup truck and a silver Porsche attached to the trailer on the back. She sheepishly said she was quite a nosy neighbor and she just had to know what was going on, and thank God she did. The police thought, because this was their first proper lead. This was a very nice car and the whole scene just looked weird to her. She decided to grab some bags and throw them into the main bins, making an excuse to walk past and snoop. She said the person attaching the car was a middle-aged white male with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled over his face. "Nice car," she commented. "Oh, it's not mine. I'm just moving it for a guy who bought it on eBay," he replied without turning around. She stayed for a moment longer, but it was clear that the man was in no mood to talk. They enhanced the footage, and using her description, the police appealed to the public and were surprised at just how many tips they had got. One man at a rest stop about 20 minutes away said he recognized the man and the truck instantly. He had been stood by his car and watched as the man in the truck pulled up, but the car on the trailer was covered over. He tried to make some small talk about where he was driving to and the likes, but the man seemed more focused on making sure the car underneath was completely shielded from view. The man, also being a bit nosy, pulled up the tarp to have a peek. He complimented him on the car, a lovely silver Porsche. The man mumbled something about eBay and then started heading inside with a plastic bag. The other driver noticed a red stain on his trousers, but at the time thought nothing of it. The cameras inside the rest stop were very good quality, and this confirmed everything he had said almost to the minute. The driver of the pickup truck, and now their prime suspect, walked into the service area to use the toilets, still carrying a black plastic bag. At one point, he looked right in the direction of the camera, and this was the first time they saw his face. About 5 minutes later, the man walked back out, in new jeans and a new t-shirt. The cameras on the outside of the rest stop showed the truck and the Porsche driving away. And this was the first time they could just about make out a license plate. Enhancements showed that it was an Oklahoma license plate and that the truck had been rented. Finally, on October 31st, just 5 days after Philip was killed, the police announced they had made an arrest. The truck had been linked to a Michael Knack vendor. He had a long history with the law, including accusations of rape, kidnapping, home invasions, and armed robbery. He had pleaded guilty to 1 count of kidnapping and 9 counts of robbery with a firearm in an exchange for a 20-year sentence. He was released on October 24, 2002, having served 8 years of that 20-year sentence. Michael now worked as a handyman, just doing odd jobs around town. The name meant nothing to Philip's family or friends, and there was no connection that anyone could find between Michael and Philip. They lived almost 900 miles apart. Near Michael's home in Oklahoma, officers located a storage unit that he had recently rented. Inside was the stolen Porsche, and inside that was a hammer with Philip's blood and hair on it, and most of the stolen items from the house. Michael sat in custody saying absolutely nothing. However, after talking to his mother, she revealed the connection. Michael was the handyman of none other than Gene Kirkpatrick, Valerie's father and Philip's father-in-law. Everything was pointing towards a murder-for-hire plot. On November 2nd, the police brought Gene in for an interview. People said Gene had placed blame on Philip for the loss of his daughter and thought once he was out of the picture, they could get full custody of Gene. Didn't want Kennedy being raised by Philip. Friends and family could not believe what they were hearing. He did everything he could for his family, and the devastation he felt when Valerie fell ill and eventually passed away had consumed him. In the interview, Gene said he had vented about Philip and admitted he had made comments to Michael about wanting him dead, but he described it as locker room talk, something that Michael had taken seriously without him realizing it. He didn't think his handyman would actually do anything he said, but later he started to backtrack and admitted to police what they already knew had happened. I guess I gave him the green light. Everything was his suggestion, but I was right there with him. He said he felt awful for considering it, thinking that Kennedy would see him as a monster. She's gonna say my grandfather killed my daddy, he said. At the end of the interview, he asked, "Am I going to jail right away?" It scares me, the consequences. Police found that Gene had paid Michael $3,000 in cash to kill Philip, with proof that he had handed this over in a McDonald's parking lot. Gene also promised $10,000 more and whatever he wanted to steal from Philip's house. Gene sent him a video of Philip's condo and Porsche. Despite how everyone else had described Philip, Reagan said she believed him to be a cold person and a narcissist, saying he couldn't relate to people's feelings. No one in Philip's life recognized what the Kirkpatricks were saying. It just made no sense. Roy said his brother's death was the result of selfishness, revenge, and complete obsession after Valerie had died. Roy said that Gene had made repeated comments pressuring Philip to promise that if Valerie passed away, he would let them have full custody of Kennedy. Philip refused every time and told his brother that his relationship with the Kirkpatricks had started to deteriorate rapidly. In one conversation with Roy, Philip said he was starting to worry about his own safety after so many threats from Gene Kirkpatrick was charged with conspiracy to commit murder and Michael Knackvinder was charged with first-degree murder alongside burglary charges. One of Gene's old friends said that he was a first-class person who would do anything for you. He called the allegations against him 100% out of character. "I have never had anything shock me as much as that did," he said. Michael pleaded not guilty to all the charges, as did Gene, but Gene managed to get a $1 million loan from a friend and bail himself out while awaiting trial. On November 4th, Philip's funeral was held. Kennedy was not allowed to go, but Philip's first wife Karen and her mother Catherine attended. They had both stayed close to Philip, and they, along with Philip and Karen's sons and many more from the community, came together to say goodbye. After a custody battle, a judge ordered Reagan to give up temporary custody of Kennedy so that she could live with Roy, Philip's brother. Roy said he was overwhelmed with joy to have Kennedy in their family home. Just over a year after that fateful October day, Michael Nachvinder took to the stand in his own defense. He was denying murder, claiming that he had been framed by Jean and was under the impression that he was only picking up a car that Jean had purchased on eBay. And Jean testified that when they were talking about killing Philip, it was in jest. So anything Michael took from that was out of context, and if he'd killed him, it had only been out of his own volition. More than 30 people testified and 300 pieces of evidence were shown to the court. Michael Nachvinder was finally found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In July 2011, a jury also found Gene Kirkpatrick guilty, and he too was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Despite all the letters sent to the judge about how people have got it all wrong about Gene, the judge said he saw through it. Your friends and family do not know the dark side of you. The dark side that the jury saw. The dark side that conspired with Mr. Nachvinder to send him some 900 miles away to this community of Fargo to bludgeon Mr. Gattuso to death. All for your misguided ends. Kennedy was later awarded almost $10 million in damages in a wrongful death lawsuit filed by her family against Jean. And there is now a permanent restraining order that keeps the Kirkpatricks from having any contact with Kennedy. Reagan said she would never try to enter Kennedy's life, but hopes that someday after Kennedy turns 18, she might look them all up. We'd love to know that she's doing well and that she's happy and has had a good life, she said. She visits her father in prison a few times a year and still believes he's innocent. He does not have what it takes to take someone's life, she said. In 2016, more than 6 years later, a judge ordered that Philip's $3.7 million estate would be divided equally between his sons Joseph and Philip Jr. and Kennedy. Kennedy went to live with Philip's niece in the New Orleans area, and Julie is still close to Philip's family and sees Kennedy every few years as well. She's doing very well. She's turning into a beautiful young lady, Julie said. Was a crime that shocked everyone in the area, and 3-year-old Kennedy lost both her parents in the space of a year. Friends said that Philip, devastated by the loss of his wife, was more focused than ever on being the best dad he could be. But this was snatched away from him and his 3 children. And for what? It was such a senseless murder that ruined so many lives. And it is a case that will always leave more questions than answers. On January 29, 1986, a surveying crew discovered human remains down an embankment near Lake Elsinore off the Ortega Highway in California. Investigators were unable to identify the victim, who had died from an apparent gunshot wound, and her identity would remain unknown for the next 35 years. Finally, in January 2022, the Riverside County District Attorney's Office announced that the partial human remains belonged to Linda Louise LeBeau. Linda was born April 10, 1950. At some point in her life, she married Philip LeBeau, but the two would later divorce. Around the time she disappeared, which was 9 years before her remains were found, she had been moving on and had a new love in her life. However, her ex, LeBeau, was apparently not happy about this and had been giving her new boyfriend trouble. On the evening of Thursday, October 6, 1977, 27-year-old Linda had met LeBeau at Love's Restaurant, which is now a Denny's, in Tustin, California. She was supposed to collect $300 from him from damage he had caused to her boyfriend's car in a jealous rage. Afterward, she was at a Texaco at what's now a Starbucks at Red Hill Avenue in El Camino Real. Witnesses saw Linda arguing at the gas station with another man whom investigators believe was LeBeau inside her 1971 Volkswagen van. Linda got gas, then got into her vehicle and accidentally backed into someone else's car. She then jumped out of the Volkswagen and ran towards Red Hill Avenue, but the man she was with, believed to be LeBeau, chased after her and grabbed her by the arm, and they returned her vehicle. It's unclear why she took off running after the accident. Linda spoke to the driver of the car she hit and he gave her his contact information, and this was the last time she was ever seen alive again. Her boyfriend would quickly report her missing, and 3 days later, her Volkswagen with her purse inside was found along the shoulder of the Red Hill Freeway on ramp to the southbound I-5 freeway. Police later learned LeBeau returned home to his girlfriend much later than he was expected that night, wearing a different set of clothes and wet. He told investigators he was reminiscing at the house off Ortega Highway where he and Linda once lived, and then he strangely stopped for a swim. In 2007, her surviving family members provided their DNA to assist in identifying any remains belonging to Linda that may ever be found. After they provided their DNA, the Justice Department notified the Tustin police, who had long forgotten about the case. That's when they found an old report that explained how she was last seen after a suspicious traffic accident on October 6, 1977. When her van was found a few days later, her personal possessions were inside and there were no signs of a fight. After speaking with her loved ones, children, and boyfriend, they found out that she had often been abused by her ex-husband LeBeau. She often showed up at work with black eyes. Her apartment was burglarized and sentimental things from her new relationship were taken. And her new boyfriend's car had sugar put into its gas tank and his tires slashed. Police are still looking to speak to 2 old co-workers of Linda's named Sarah Ferguson and a woman named Yoko from the company Addressograph Multigraph Corporation where she worked as an office clerk. Investigators believe these women may have crucial missing details about the case. Linda was born with the surname Durnall and loved car racing, boating, and sailing. She and LeBeau had met at the Orange County International Raceway. Her brother recalled LeBeau treating his sister well in the beginning, but soon after marrying, things turned bad and after only 4 years, they divorced. Thankfully, Linda got her name back, but LeBeau, who died in 2008 of natural causes, still remains the primary suspect in her murder. On January 12, 1981, a dog in Houston, Texas, wandered out of the woods near Wallaceville Road carrying an arm. Upon investigation, the remains of an adult male and female were discovered. A pair of green gym shorts and a bloody towel were also found near their bodies. It was determined they were the victims of homicide and had been there about 2 months before being found. Unable to determine their identities, they became known as Harris County Does and were buried in the Harris County Paupers Cemetery. With a lack of identification, officials hired an artist to create sketches based on photos of the deceased. But once again, no leads were obtained, leaving them at another dead end. 30 years later, in July 2011, the couple's bodies were exhumed in order to collect DNA to determine if the two were related, but they weren't. The case remained cold for 40 years until 2021 when Identifinders International requested the remains to test. The funding was provided by AudioChuck, a media company that produces the podcast Crime Junkies. They then uploaded the information to GEDmatch, and within 10 days, using genetic genealogy, a genetic genealogist was able to narrow down the male's possible identity from close cousins living in Kentucky. She began searching for contact information for his cousins and other relatives and found a potential sister still living in Florida. When contacted, the sister Donna Brooks stated that not only has her brother been missing for 40 years, but also his wife and baby too. Her DNA confirmed that the male remains did in fact belong to her 21-year-old brother, Harold Dean Klaus Jr., that she called Junior. His wife, 17-year-old Tina Gail Lynn Klaus, was then identified as Whale. The genealogist had already located Tina's grandparents in a family tree but was unable to confirm her identity yet because they had 11 children who had moved to 6 different states. Tina was born in Florida where birth records are kept private, so it was a little more difficult. Before discovering her identity through Donna, she had become contacting cousins all over the country in the large extended family, but no one was returning calls or emails. One cousin even yelled at her and hung up after saying that a deceased first cousin had nothing to do with him. Once Dean's sister told her of the marriage, she was able to pull up the marriage record and confirmed that she was the granddaughter of the already identified grandparents she had been researching. Sadly, their 1-year-old baby named Holly Marie Klaus was still missing. No baby was found with the couple's bodies, and so far, no baby doe cases have been found that match her description. Harold, known as Dean or Junior, grew up in New Smyrna, Florida. He enjoyed taking care of people but sometimes made poor decisions in his life, and in the mid-1970s, his mother Donna said he had even run off once and joined a cult. However, upon returning home, he would meet and fall in love with Tina. He would also begin working as a finished carpenter for home builders. Tina grew up in a challenging home and was excited to be married. He and Tina quickly married in 1979 and had a baby named Holly Marie. In 1980, Dean was offered a job with builder D.R. Horton, building custom cabinets in new homes in Houston, Texas. He decided to move his family there to work full-time to make more money to better care for Tina and Holly. He borrowed his mother's car, agreeing he would eventually buy the car. After they moved to Lewisfield near Dallas, they would often send letters to their family back home, but in late 1980, those letters stopped. The last letter was sent in early December 1980, when Tina sent home pictures of the couple's one-year-old daughter to Dean's mother in Florida. Dean was periodically involved with a religious group known either as the Brethren or the Jesus People with ties to Florida, Texas, and Oklahoma, and may have reconnected with them in Texas. His car was found in Los Angeles, California several months after the couple was murdered, but their family had no way of knowing that the couple was already dead. In mid-1981, a man called Dean's mother and said someone could drive his car to the Daytona Speedway from California for $1,000. She agreed in hopes of finding out information about their whereabouts. Someone calling herself Sister Suzanne, along with two young women, arrived dressed in religious-looking robes. When Dean's mother started asking questions, the two younger women began trying to answer her but were immediately cut off and forbidden to talk by Sister Suzanne. Sister Suzanne would then tell her Dina and Tina were with their group now and didn't want to see or talk to their family anymore and wanted to cut ties. However, unbeknownst to her, Sister Suzanne was not being honest as the murdered couple had already been discovered. After talking with the religious group, Dina and Tina's families reported them missing. If Holly is still alive and was raised by someone else, she would be 42 years old as of January 24, 2022, and may not know anything about her true identity and may have been given a different date of birth. She may have grown up around a religious community that call themselves by the titles brother or sister and may have been related to the Jesus People in Chicago. Dean's mother is now 80 years old and finally has some closure. On July 31, 1997, a maintenance worker picking up trash in a roadside park in Ada Township, Grand Rapids, Michigan, found human remains in a wooded area behind some outbuildings. The body was determined to be that of a black female between the ages of 20 to 30 years old. Her teeth showed a lack of dental care, and she was likely killed between March and August of 1996. A reconstruction clay model was recreated by a Michigan State Police forensic artist in 2009, but it did not help in determining her identity. Unable to determine her identity, she became known as Ada Bones Jane Doe, 1997, for the next 25 years. In 2020, the DNA Doe Project took the case and attempted to create a DNA profile from the bones. The initial attempt was unable to create a workable sample, but in 2021, Hudson Alpha Discovery combined and enriched the samples and uploaded it to GeneMatch. It took the volunteer genealogist just 1 week to come up with a likely candidate. Using genetic genealogy, the family tree led them to a particular county in Mississippi, and from there, they were able to tie together some descendants of common ancestors who had relocated to Benton Harbor, Michigan. A family member of the likely candidate then confirmed it by having their DNA compared to the victims. On January 5, 2022, it was announced that the Jane Doe was 31-year-old Stephanie Renee Judson. Stephanie was born in 1966 in Benton Harbor and had been living in Grand Rapids, Michigan since 1980. She was described as having a good heart but began hanging out with the wrong crowd at an early age. Stephanie's family said she moved from Benton Harbor to Grand Rapids with Gregory Kelly, a violent repeat offender who was later convicted of sex trafficking and died in prison in 2020 from COVID-19. Stephanie had left behind a sister and 2 children who had searched for her extensively over the years. Sadly, her mother died just 2 months before the announcement was made and never learned that her daughter had been found or identified. They didn't know Stephanie had been found in 1997, but they did know that she was a victim of sex trafficking and substance abuse. She had somewhat lost contact with her family, but would reach out on birthdays and holidays. The family never stopped looking for her, and just last year, her son wished her a happy birthday on Facebook, also writing, "You are missed wherever you are." It's believed that she may be the final victim of a serial killer in the Grand Rapids area in the 1990s. On May 5, 2012, a deputy with the Talladega County Sheriff's Office patrolling a rural area on Allred Road in Lincoln, Alabama, noticed the front door to a vacant home was wide open and decided to investigate. While searching the backyard, the deputy discovered female human remains. She was wearing a navy sweatshirt, blue sweatpants, and off-white house shoes. She had been there a while, making the retrieval of fingerprints impossible. She did have the word powders engraved on her dentures, but even with that, they were unable to identify her. The location she was found is less than 5 miles from the Talladega Superspeedway, often used by NASCAR. At the time she was discovered, the Superspeedway was holding a multi-day race event with thousands in attendance. She was believed to be a white female between the ages of 45 and 65 years old. The Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences would determine that she did have lung cancer, but there are still some suspicious circumstances around the time she was last seen. 3 months later, she was entered into NAMUS and NCIC, but her description did not match any local missing person cases, and the case went cold and she became known as Lincoln Jane Doe. Using donations for the lab testing by unsolved crowdfunding, forensic genetic genealogist Carla Davis and the Lincoln Police Department partnered with Othram Incorporated to help determine her identity. Using DNA from the autopsy, Carla Davis began tracing a family tree of the deceased. Carla was able to determine the remains belonged to 67-year-old Jean Turner Ponders. Jean was born April 14, 1945 in Maynard Field, Tennessee. Upon graduation from Lincoln Memorial University, she moved to Chatsworth, Georgia, and began her teaching career. This is where she would meet and marry Willie Ponders, known as Bill, and together they had 3 children, Jason, Jonathan, and Jennifer. She taught several decades in Murray and Whitfield counties in Georgia as both a high school biology teacher and reading and biology teacher at the middle school. She was described as a really good cook, a loving mother and grandmother, and loved to garden. Jean and Bill would divorce after 30 years of marriage. He got the house in the divorce, forcing her to move out. After that, she lived in Dalton, Calhoun, Sandy Springs, and at the time of her death, she was living in Willie O Creek community in Roswell. Her sister stated on Jean's Facebook page that the last time she talked to her was on the phone, and the two had talked about Jean visiting her the upcoming weekend, but one of her children had her car and she was going to find someone to give her a ride. Jean told her that she had met a girl from Sandy Springs that was planning on traveling to Maryville, Tennessee, and would drop Jean off at her sister's house on the way. The woman she would be riding with had a boyfriend who had just gotten out of prison for murder. Her sister was worried and tried to talk her out of going, but Jean told her she would be okay, and that was the last time she heard from her sister. When Jean didn't arrive to her sister's, she assumed she had taken her advice and didn't go through with her plans. But when she tried to call her a few weeks later, her phone was disconnected. She didn't think much of it at the time because Jean said a family member had her phone on her account and often threatened to remove her. Jean's son called his aunt a few months later and asked if his mom was at her house. They both realized that neither of them had heard from her in a long while and began investigating her disappearance. Although it is common practice for dentures to be labeled with either initials or names, the name was misspelled as Powders instead of Ponders. Investigators are still trying to determine the circumstances that led to her remains ending up in Talladega County, Alabama, behind the abandoned home. On November 6, 1994, and remains were found by rabbit hunters in a cornfield near a wooded area at the south end cul-de-sac of 32nd Avenue, just north of I-96 in Wright Township, Ottawa County. Investigators believe the victim had ended up there sometime between May and September of 1994. Investigators at the time thought she was a Hispanic or Latino female between the ages of 35 and 45 years old, and her cause of death was ultimately ruled a homicide. She had wavy brown, auburn hair and a healed fracture in her lower back. Black stretch pants, pink underwear, and blue high-heeled shoes were found near the body. Detectives theorized that she may have been a victim of serial killer Larry Dwayne Hall. Unable to determine her identity, she became known as Matilda Ottawa County Jane Doe, 1994. In 2007, a DNA profile of the victim was obtained and entered into the Cody's database, but no matches were found. In February 2021, the DNA Doe Project took on the case and began using her DNA profile and genetic genealogy to determine her identity. The DNA profile of the remains indicated North Atlantic and French-Canadian ancestry, not Hispanic as was originally thought. Starting with second and third cousin matches, the genealogists worked their way through the Jane Doe's family tree until they came across a missing persons report from Minneapolis from October 1993 that seemed like a good match to the Jane Doe. Detectives from the Ottawa County Sheriff's Department contacted relatives of the possible match and were able to obtain DNA confirmation of the relationship. On January 20, 2022, the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office and the DNA Doe Project announced the identification as Shelley Ray Christian. Shelley was born with the surname Keppard on February 13, 1964, and had been living in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which is also where she was last seen. She was reported missing by her family in October 1993 at the age of 29, and her body was found over 1 year later on November 6, 1994, almost 600 miles away in Michigan. The team was able to identify a couple born in Iowa in the 1840s as ancestors of the then unknown woman, which provided the first breakthrough in the case. In an attempt to confirm that this was the right person, they found a German baptismal record from the mid-1800s that tied a hitherto mystery DNA match to a separate ancestral line of hers, which confirmed that Matilda Doe was in fact Shelley. Her suspected killer, Larry Hall, remains behind bars for the 1993 kidnapping and murder of 15-year-old Jessica Roach. There still remains 9 Jane Does that are believed to be his victims, in addition to 7 identified. It is speculated that he killed between 39 and 44 females during the 1980s and 1990s. Many are still missing or remain Jane Does, and he had confessed to about 14 of the murders but later recanted most of them. He often left similar injuries on his victims, and many were found near Civil War memorials, most likely due to the fact that he enjoyed attending war reenactments. He has not been charged for any other murders besides Jessica's and was dubbed the Springfield Three. He lived in Indiana and would often travel with or without his twin brother. He has an IQ of 80, and like many serial killers, he was teased and picked on during school years and had an abusive home life. At this time, there is very little information available about Shelley, but she now has her name back and hopefully her family has some type of closure. Louis Anthony McCurley was born February 15, 1977 to Harold and Sheila McCurley. In 1984, he had 3 siblings and was a first grader at Central Elementary in Allentown, Pennsylvania. He was described as friendly and talkative, but was also a loner and a timid child who was afraid to sleep alone. On June 7, 1984, 7-year-old Louis was being cared for by his aunt while his mother was getting her tubes tied. He came home from school that day to his apartment at the 300 block of Chew Street in Allentown. He told his aunt that he was going to walk 2 homes away to a neighbor's house. He was last seen walking between 4th Street and Gordon Street. Carmen Marco, who ran Marco's doggy shop at 429 Gordon Street, remembered that Louis spent 45 minutes in his shop that day trying to avoid 2 teenage boys who were chasing and teasing him. He then left walking east, and his parents believed he was headed to 391 Chew Street, the home of an elderly woman he liked to visit. Another witness claimed to have seen Louis talking to an unidentified man and woman in a park near Jordan Creek, approximately 1 block from his home, about 4:30 p.m. By 11:10 p.m. that night, when Louis had not returned home, his parents reported him missing. They waited this long because he usually liked to stay out late and didn't normally return home until about 9:30 p.m. After he was reported missing, an extensive search of the area was performed but turned up no clues to his whereabouts. Louis was known to enjoy playing near water, particularly Jordan Creek, which was located a block from his apartment, and Lehigh River, which was located a little ways east from Jordan Creek. Shortly before he vanished, he mentioned that he would like to visit Dorney Park, but no trace of him was found at any of these locations. Police later found the boys they believed scared Louis, but they were cleared of any wrongdoing. Police initially focused the investigation on Lewis' parents for a long period of time, but ultimately concluded that Lewis had been abducted by someone outside the family. His parents took lie detector tests early on in the investigation and were ruled out as suspects. Rumors had risen that they abused and/or neglected Lewis, but Child Services investigated the rumors and found that they could not be proven. 5 months before he went missing, Lewis told his parents, his school nurse, and a psychologist that he had been molested by a couple named Frank and Elizabeth. His parents brought him to the police to relay his story. However, police did not have enough evidence to investigate the claims as he didn't know their last names or addresses. Lewis also stated that the couple had threatened to hurt him if he ever told anyone what happened. It's unknown whether the incidents are related to Lewis's disappearance, but he was strangely last seen talking to an unidentified man and woman in the neighborhood. In December 1984, David Riggs of New York City, who claimed to be a private investigator, started an organization called Search 7 with the goal of finding children who'd been abducted by strangers. Riggs announced that the organization's first case would be Louis McAleese. He claimed to be an expert in child abduction cases based on his graduate degree in sociology and his work with runaway children in New York City. He theorized that Lewis had been abducted for financial reasons. However, in 1988, Riggs was arrested in West Virginia after he approached 5 boys and offered to pay them to take photos, which they declined. Investigators discovered that his organization had never been registered as a nonprofit, and he did not have a private investigator's license. Riggs pleaded guilty to 2 counts of attempted child abduction and 1 count of sexual abuse for the West Virginia incident. Police investigated the possibility that he was connected to Lewis's disappearance, but concluded that he was not a suspect. 11 months after Lewis disappeared, his family moved into the house on 2th Street that he liked to visit. The elderly female friend of Lewis's who had lived there was moving to a retirement home, and Lewis's family wanted to be at a place he knew and might return to. He had often played at the residence and had dreamed of living there someday. His parents were unable to make the mortgage payments for the home in spite of contributions from community members who were moved by their plate. They unfortunately filed for bankruptcy and moved to Effort, Pennsylvania in 1989. The Chew Street residence has remained vacant since they moved. Authorities believe that it's possible that the unidentified couple may have been responsible for his disappearance. Lewis was one of the first missing children featured on milk cartons, grocery bags, and billboards. His parents were married for 45 years until his father passed away, and then his mother in 2018. His siblings, Harold, Edward, and Sheila, still seek answers in their brother's disappearance. His case was reopened in 1990 and then again in 2004. As of today, Lewis has never been found, and this case remains unsolved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.